Imagine the unthinkable. Your loved one disappears. One moment, everything is as it should be, and the next, the person who meant everything to you has simply vanished. No phone call, no goodbye, no trace, just gone. And all you are left with is overwhelming emptiness and endless questions. This is the heartbreaking, terrifying story of Nurse Evelyn Harper, whose sudden disappearance tore apart the small town of Marlow, Oregon. But it's not just a story of loss. It's a story of secrets, lies, and a darkness lurking where you least expect it. Evelyn Harper was no stranger to the people of Marlow. She was their nurse, their friend, the person they turned to in times of need. She had lived in the town for over a decade, a constant presence at the local clinic. At 32, she was the epitome of selflessness, always willing to give her time and energy to others. But beneath her calm exterior, there were cracks that no one had seen, and a story waiting to be uncovered. When she vanished one quiet Wednesday night, no one could have predicted the twists the investigation would take. But as the search began, secrets started surfacing. Secrets about Evelyn's marriage, her past, and the chilling truth behind her disappearance. Marlow was a small, peaceful town. It had been a home for generations, a place where neighbors were friends, where families watched each other's backs, and where the biggest concerns were the upcoming harvest or the weather. But for Evelyn, Marlow had always been more than just a place to live. It had been a sanctuary, a place where she could build a life for herself and her family. She married Aaron, a quiet but strong man who loves woodworking. Together, they had two beautiful children, a son, Lucas, and a daughter, Mia. On the outside, their life was picture perfect. Their home sat on a quiet hill, surrounded by tall, whispering trees, and their kids were well loved by the community. Evelyn worked at the clinic, taking care of the elderly and sick. It was her calling, and she loved it. She was the town's backbone, always there when someone needed help. But no one saw the cracks beginning to form behind closed doors. No one saw how tired Evelyn was becoming, how overwhelmed she felt juggling her family, her work, and the weight of a marriage that was slowly suffocating her. Over the months leading up to her disappearance, Evelyn had changed. Her smile didn't reach her eyes anymore. Her laughter, once infectious, was rare. She began to withdraw, spending longer hours at the clinic. When she came home, she was distant, lost in her thoughts. Aaron noticed the change. He would find her sitting at the kitchen table, staring out the window, her mind somewhere far away. But when he asked her what was wrong, she would just smile faintly and say everything was fine. Yet he knew. He could feel it. Something was off. He had tried to make things better, to offer his support, but Evelyn never let him in. The distance between them grew until it felt like a chasm too wide to cross. But he couldn't understand why. The life they had built together seemed perfect. So why was she pulling away? Evelyn had always been a beacon of strength in the community. But within the walls of her home, she had been quietly falling apart. She had often confided in her best friend, Clara, who lived far away in Portland, about the pressure she felt to be everything for everyone. The perfect wife, mother, nurse, and friend. But the weight of it all was becoming unbearable. For months, Evelyn's mental health had been deteriorating. She couldn't bring herself to face the growing dissatisfaction in her marriage, the mounting responsibilities at work, and her own crippling self-doubt. She felt like she was losing herself. Late one night, when the house was quiet and the kids were asleep, Evelyn sat alone in the living room. She stared at the flickering light from the fireplace, lost in thought. Aaron had been away for work, and she couldn't help but wonder if they had drifted so far apart that nothing could bring them back. The doubt crept in, making her question the decisions she had made, the life she had built. She had always believed she could carry the world on her shoulders, but lately, the world felt heavier than ever. It was a quiet Wednesday night when Evelyn didn't return home from her shift. Aaron, who had just finished dinner with the children, didn't think much of it at first. She had been staying late at the clinic more often, helping out with an emergency or just catching up on work. But hours passed, and there was still no sign of her. Her phone was going straight to voicemail. Her car was still in the driveway. The kids were asleep. He tried not to panic, but the sinking feeling in his chest grew. By midnight, Aaron was pacing. He checked the clinic's phone line, only to be told that Evelyn had left at 10 p.m., as usual. But no one had seen her since. He called her friends, no one knew anything. Aaron's worry began to morph into fear. Something wasn't right. He called the police. Detective Laura Collins arrived shortly after, and the investigation began. At first, it seemed like a routine missing person case. But as the hours turned into days, the lack of evidence began to weigh heavily on the small town. There were no signs of a struggle at the house. No broken windows, no traces of violence. It was as if Evelyn had simply walked out the door and never returned. The police scoured the area. They checked the clinic, the local bars, and even the woods surrounding the town. But there was nothing. No one had seen her leave. No one had heard anything. As the days dragged on, rumors started to spread. Had she run away? Had she been abducted? The town's fear and confusion only deepened. As the search for Evelyn grew colder, Detective Collins began to dig deeper into the Harper family's life. What she uncovered sent shivers down her spine. Aaron, who had always been seen as the gentle, quiet man in town, had a history that no one knew about. Years before, when Aaron had lived in Portland, he was involved in a violent incident with an ex-girlfriend. It had never been fully investigated, but there were whispers of anger, jealousy, and rage. Detective Collins learned that Aaron had a temper he had kept hidden from his new life in Marlow. But what worried her more was the growing realization that Evelyn had been hiding something too, something that no one had suspected. Evelyn's sister, Clara, who lived in Portland, had always been estranged from the family. But after Evelyn's disappearance, she reached out. In a quiet, cryptic message, Clara told the police that Evelyn had been in a tumultuous relationship with Aaron for months. They'd fought often, but Evelyn never spoke of it. Why? Because she was afraid. The fear in Clara's words was palpable. Evelyn had confided in her about the darkness in her marriage, but Clara never imagined it would escalate this far. And then there was the phone call. A woman, who had worked with Evelyn at the clinic, came forward with a chilling piece of information. She told Detective Collins that just hours before Evelyn disappeared, she had been seen arguing with a man in the alley behind the clinic. The man, whom no one recognized, had been tall, wearing a dark coat, and seemed to be waiting for her. What the woman didn't know was that this wasn't the first time someone had seen Evelyn interacting with this man. He had been seen outside the clinic several times in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. But who was he? What was his connection to Evelyn? The investigation took a dark turn when Detective Collins received an anonymous tip. The bar owner, who had witnessed something strange one night, finally came forward. He had seen Evelyn's car parked in an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town, at an hour so late that no one should have been out there. The silhouette of a man stood near her car, watching it, but never getting too close. The farmhouse was a place that most of the town had forgotten. It had been abandoned for years, the windows boarded up, the roof caving in. It was the kind of place where people went to hide, to escape. But why was Evelyn there? Collins and her partner, Detective Turner, made their way out to the farmhouse. It was just as eerie as the tip had described. The wind howled through the trees, casting long shadows across the fields that seemed to stretch endlessly into the night. There was a weight in the air, a sense that something unspeakable had happened here. They entered the barn with caution. It was dark, the only light coming from the flashlights in their hands. The dust in the air hung thick, giving the place an ancient, forgotten feel. And then, as they moved deeper into the barn, something caught their eye. Evelyn's purse, half buried under an old tarp. Detective Collins felt a cold rush of dread. Couldn't be. Her fingers trembled as she reached down and pulled the purse free. Inside, everything was in its place. Her ID, some cash, her lipstick, everything except her phone. The detectives combed the barn, their flashlights flicking over piles of old hay and debris. And then they found it, a blood-stained cloth, tucked away in a corner as though someone had tried to hide it. Colin's heart dropped. The blood was fresh. She couldn't be sure it was Evelyn's, but the signs pointed to something terrible. They searched the farmhouse, room by room, until they found a faint trail of blood leading outside, toward the far end of the property. It led them to the old shed at the back, the door barely hanging on its hinges. When they pushed it open, they found nothing. But there, in the dim light, something else caught Colin's attention. A faint imprint in the dirt, as if something heavy had been dragged. Was Evelyn still alive? Had she been hurt and left here? Or was this just another clue to an even darker truth? The tip had led Collins to the farmhouse, but it had also opened a door to darker, deeper secrets. What they found that night was only the beginning. As the detectives continued their investigation, they began to uncover a web of lies, secrets, and violence that had been building in the Harper household long before Evelyn's disappearance. It wasn't long before Collins and Turner discovered that Evelyn and Aaron's marriage had been more than just strained. It had been poisoned. A deep rift had formed between them, one that Evelyn had tried to hide from everyone, even her closest friends. Clara, Evelyn's estranged sister, had never quite trusted Aaron. For years, she'd been concerned about the way he controlled Evelyn, the way he held her back from pursuing her own happiness. And now, as the investigation unfolded, Clara's fears seemed more and more justified. The more they learned about Aaron, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. His violent outbursts, his jealousy, his controlling behavior, all had been hidden behind a mask of charm and quiet gentleness. The detectives uncovered past arguments between Aaron and Evelyn, arguments that had escalated in recent months. And as the final piece clicked into place, the realization hit Collins with full force. Aaron wasn't just an innocent man caught in a tragic situation. He was hiding a monstrous truth. But why did it take so long for anyone to see the cracks? Why had no one noticed the signs? Aaron's confession came not with rage or defiance, but with guilt and fear. Detective Collins had pushed him hard, and the weight of the evidence was finally too much for him to deny. Sitting in the interrogation room, Aaron's hands shook as he spoke. His voice was low, almost apologetic, as he recounted the night Evelyn had disappeared. They had argued again. This time, the fight was worse than any before. It started over something trivial. Evelyn had been late getting home. But Aaron's temper, always lurking just beneath the surface, flared. He grabbed her, shouting, accusing her of not caring, of neglecting their family. Evelyn had tried to walk away, but Aaron didn't let her. In a moment of blind rage, he shoved her. She stumbled backward and hit her head against the edge of the kitchen counter. The impact had been hard enough to knock her unconscious. Aaron's eyes filled with tears as he recounted how he had panicked. He had never meant to hurt her, but in his fear, he drove her to the farmhouse, hoping to buy time, hoping the world would forget. But Evelyn had died that night. She never regained consciousness, and Aaron, terrified of losing everything, had buried the truth. He hid her body, lied to everyone, and created a facade of normalcy. The confession was a shock to the community. The man they had trusted, the man who had seemed so gentle, so reliable, was the one responsible for the death of the woman they had all admired. The town of Marlow, once filled with warmth and trust, was now fractured, forever changed. When the truth came to light, it shattered the town. The sheriff's office held a press conference, confirming Aaron's confession and detailing the investigation's findings. The residents of Marlow were left in shock. They had always known Aaron as a quiet, reserved man, a loving father and husband. But behind his calm demeanor was a monster they never suspected. Evelyn's funeral was a somber event. The whole town gathered to say goodbye to the woman who had been so much to so many. The pain was palpable, the grief heavy in the air. Evelyn had given so much to the community, and now she was gone. But the questions remained. How could a man who had seemed so perfect commit such a heinous act? What had happened in the dark corners of their home that no one had seen? And why had Evelyn stayed with him for so long, hiding her pain from everyone? As time passed, the town slowly began to heal, but the scars would remain. People would always remember Evelyn, not just as the nurse who had cared for them, but as the symbol of how easily darkness can hide behind a mask of normalcy. And for Aaron, life would never be the same. Arrested and charged with manslaughter, he faced a long sentence. But the true punishment he would find was the weight of his guilt, the knowledge that he had taken the life of the one person who had ever truly loved him. Marlowe may never fully recover from the tragedy that unfolded. The town, once built on trust and familiarity, was now fractured by secrets, lies, and a betrayal so deep that it would haunt them forever. As for Evelyn Harper, her memory lived on in the hearts of those who knew her. The woman who had given so much to the community, who had sacrificed her own happiness to help others, would never be forgotten. But the true horror of her death wasn't just in how it happened. It was in the fact that no one had seen the signs. That darkness can lurk even in the most unexpected places. Sometimes the greatest horrors aren't the ones we can see. They're the ones we fail to notice. And for the people of Marlowe, they would live with that truth for the rest of their lives. Thank you for listening to this chilling story. Remember, sometimes the most terrifying things are not what we can see, but what we fail to see until it's too late.